Welcome back to our channel. Before you start this episode, I just wanted to check in with you. The last couple of episodes, we've had some video problems. This episode is no exception. My video worked just fine, but Steve's unfortunately did not. I came up with a solution. I created AI doll characters of Steve and placed them in the episode every time he spoke. I did not ask Steve if that was okay. So enjoy the episode.
Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?
Welcome back to Remember That Movie. I am the third Alejandro Rosa on IMDb.
And I am Steve Johnston, and I am not on IMDb.
And we're back with another movie and another episode. For this particular episode, we left it all up to Steve. Steve, take us on a journey.
For this episode, I picked the 1995 independent comedy Living in Oblivion. Now, when I announced this at the end of the previous episode, you did what the audience could not see because of technical issues, a very slow lean in towards the camera with a certain look on your face. And I couldn't tell if that meant you were very familiar with this movie and knew a lot about it, or you'd never heard of it before, because you kind of pulled the same face for both of those scenarios.
I just have one face.
Well, for those two, yes. So which was it? Had you heard of this, or was this one of those where I have introduced you to something new?
Yes and no.
Which is which?
When you told me what the next film was going to be, my facial reaction was of nothing. I had no idea what you were talking about.
Excellent, okay.
And then I watched it. I had never seen this film before.
Okay.
But I remember when it came out, and I remember seeing the trailer for it. I just never got around to watching it, because I remember specifically our lead with long hair telling people what to do. I remember this movie existing. I never got around to seeing it at the time.
Fantastic.
So this was my very first time, and I watched it 1.5 times, folks. I did, because the first night I tried to watch it, I was exhausted, and I had just gone through oral surgery, had a lot of medication, and so I fell asleep at my desk sitting up and missed the second half of the film. So the next day, I had to go back and watch it all over again. So I've seen it 1.5 times now.
I do like the fact that you assured me when you told me this story earlier that it had nothing to do with your enjoyment of the film that you fell asleep.
That's an excellent point. Yes, I wanted to make sure because I didn't want to hurt your feelings. I was like, no, it's not the movie you picked that made me pass out. It was everything else going around in my life at the time.
I'm wondering if there will ever come a time where one of us picks a movie that the other just either falls asleep during or cannot stand.
I think we are so obnoxiously polite that we'll never know.
We'll never know
because we'll never tell.
Yeah.
We would never do that to the other. We would just pretend to like it.
Very good.
We just have to accept that burden.
Getting back to Living in Oblivion, I did not know about it when it came out. I watched this with a group of friends in high school when it came out on VHS, and we rented it for movie night one evening. And it was the pick of a friend of mine named Mike. I have no idea how he found out about it or how he knew of its existence. But we rented it, we watched it, and we loved it. We just had a great time with this film. So I was very happy to go back and revisit it.
I don't believe I saw a movie trailer for this at the theater.
Oh.
I'm 100% sure this trailer was on some VHS tape.
What on earth would this have been a preview for? I ask that only because of the way it was released, ultimately, which we'll chat about in a little bit, because this is a textbook definition of an indie film. So let's start with a brief synopsis of the film. This is a movie about making a movie, and it is split into 3 separate parts, and each part is its own little story, and each part involves director Nick Reeve and his cast and crew attempting to shoot a scene for this movie, which happens to be titled Living in Oblivion. And despite their best efforts, things just go wrong, whether it's a light exploding, the sound of a car outside blasting music, a fist fight breaking out in the scene, or my own personal favorite, the old classic, the boom mic dipping into the shop. And so the question becomes on each of these parts, are they actually going to be able to capture the scene and actually make the movie? The story of this movie starts with director Tom DiCillo. He studied filmmaking at NYU. He worked in a technical capacity on a few films, and then directed his first film, which was Johnny Suede, starring a then unknown Brad Pitt and Catherine Keener. Johnny Suede got some critical acclaim. The critics liked it. It was nominated for an award at Cannes, I believe, but it did not get a wide release. Just for a point of reference, that film grossed $9,000 because it was shown in one theater for 1 week. And that was it. But because of the critical acclaim, he then decided to start shopping his next film, which he called Box of Moonlight, to studios to see if he could get it funded. And he could not. He met with rejection everywhere he went. And after a year or so of doing this, kind of annoyed at the whole process, he received an invitation to his wife's cousin's wedding. And while at the wedding, he was approached by an old friend that he knew from an acting class that he had taken years and years and years ago. And the friend approached him and basically said something along the lines of, "Hey, Tom, making movies, lights, camera, action, huh?" To which he responded, being several vodka martinis into the evening at this point, he said, "Oh, shut up. You have no idea what it's like. All the tension, all the agonizing details. You can have everything set perfectly, the light, the actress is ready, and then something blows up on you." And he stopped and he thought and went, wait, that's it. While I am shopping this other movie, I am going to write and make another little movie. So he went home from the wedding, he recovered from his hangover, and then he penned the script. And then he sought out trying to just gather some money to make the script. He put in some himself. He showed the script to Catherine Keener, who took it, read it. He could hear her giggling in the other room. She showed it to her husband at the time, Dermot Mulroney, who said, "Hey, if I give you $5,000 to help make this, can I play the director?" And Tom said, "No, but I will take your money. And rather than director, you can be the camera guy. How's that sound? Because I really want Steve Buscemi to play the director. That's kind of who I envisioned doing that." And so it turned into a little tightly knit group project where if you had a little money that you could put towards the production, you got a part. My favorite, personally, is the boom operator. Did anything strike you about the boom operator and his acting style? Did you notice that in every frame he was flexing? That's probably because he was an employee at a gym that Tom's wife went to. And he said, "Oh, here's $2,000. Can I have a part?" And he said, "Yeah, you're the boom operator."
And he was kind of great.
He was great.
He was ridiculous and very funny. And they put him in the almost non-existent shirt.
To show off the bicep. Yeah. At least I assume that is the case. It fits. The friend who had approached him at the cousin's wedding got a part. He was the clapperboard operator.
Awesome.
The cousin was the script supervisor, and her husband was the sound mixer. And so they managed to gather about $37,000. And over the course of 5 days, they shot the movie, they put it together, and every single person loved it. And then they turned to Tom and said, "Tom, you've got to make this feature length," because everything that they had gathered, his script and everything, was just part one. And there was a problem because part one is about 30 minutes long, which is too long for a short, but not long enough to be a feature. So Tom DiCillo said, "All right, yeah, I'm feeling really good about this." So he spent about 4 months writing parts 2 and 3, and then ultimately a year after part 1 had been shot, they got back together to shoot parts 2 and 3. Now, for parts 2 and 3, there were a couple new cast members that had to be added because there were a couple new roles that popped up, and he needed funding for it. Because he managed to scrounge together what he could to make part 1, but now we've got 2 other parts to put together. So far as casting, first was the part of Chad Palomino, our A-list actor who is just doing this little B movie for street cred, essentially, because, Nick knows Quentin Tarantino, so he's going to get in with him. Originally, Tom DiCillo wrote that part for Brad Pitt. He had him in mind, based largely on his performance in Johnny Suede. The problem was, by the time they got around to filming this part, Brad Pitt was on a promotional tour for a little film that he had done called Legends of the Fall, and was not available. The story is that Tom DiCillo was on the phone with Catherine Keener. They got to discussing the fact that Brad Pitt obviously would not be able to do this, at which point someone walked past Catherine Keener's window, so she stuck her head out and said, "Hey, James, do you want a part in a movie?" And James LeGros turned and said, "Yeah, all right." And that is how he became Chad Palomino. The last person, or the last role that they needed to fill, was for a little person in part 3 for a dream sequence. And Tom DiCillo has admitted that he kind of made a mistake because he had assumed that he could just find any actor under 3 foot and be fine. And he discovered very quickly that no, most of the people that he talked to came in, they tried out for it, and they just could not act. One of the other cast members said, "Oh, I know of a guy, he's a little person, and he's a great stage actor. Let's see if we can get him, let's see if we can find him." They found, working in a copy shop, a very talented stage actor who agreed to come in and audition, came in, nailed it, and Tom DiCillo realized that, yeah, we actually needed an actor to do this, and this gentleman fits the role perfectly, which is how Peter Dinklage got his first feature film credit, which I just love. I had forgotten that from the first go-round.
For those of you who do not know, Peter Dinklage is an incredible stage actor, went to school for it, and he just nails it.
He does.
It was so interesting to see him. I'm a huge fan of Peter Dinklage. Any dialogue you give him, he turns into just gold.
Yes.
And in this film, in this ridiculous moment, he delivers his lines so powerfully that I wrote, Peter is brilliant. He's wearing a ridiculous tuxedo.
Sky blue tuxedo.
With a top hat. And then he delivers lines that make you go, somebody give him an award just for that. He spoke for 5 seconds. Give him an award.
Yes.
It was amazing.
I also like the acting he did that did not involve speaking, which we'll discuss when we get to part 3. Lastly, we have the issue of financing parts 2 and 3. DiCillo had actually gotten in touch with what he described as a sleazebag producer who was going to give him the money, but was going to demand recasting and some rewriting of the script. Thankfully, in the time between finishing part 1 and starting parts 2 and 3, that cousin, Hilary Guilford, inherited some money, called Tom and said, "Hey Tom, do you mind if I finance the rest of the film?" To which Tom said, "Yeah, that's fine." And then he turned around and told the quote-unquote sleazebag producer to go pound sand. So this was purely almost like a bunch of friends getting together in order to make a movie, which I absolutely love. And I happen to think that the product that they have put out is something special. And I mean that in a good way. This is a movie about making movies. I know that you, at one point, perhaps you still do, I'm actually not entirely sure, have worked in video production of some ilk, correct? Have you ever had any of the experiences that are portrayed in this movie?
I do have a little bit of experience on a variety of different scales. I have created small projects myself. I have done industrial films. I have done educational films that I've been in. And I was in 2 true crime TV shows. Aside from that, years working in the theater at the student level, working backstage, when things go wrong, that people can't see. I mean, you name it. So yeah, I was extremely amused because, these things happen. You can spend a bunch of time working on something and then something goes wrong at the last second. Something fails, something breaks, and you just never know.
I'm wondering if someone who hasn't worked in that capacity at all would find it as amusing as perhaps we did. Because I have not done anything professionally, but whilst in high school, we did a video unit in our theater class in which the class split up into, I think, 5 groups or something like that, and each of us made a movie. We had an issue where 2 weeks of planned shooting and what have you, and 1 week in, the guy who's playing our lead arrives at school with a shaved head. We just kind of looked at each other and tried to think, okay, how do we work around this? How do we roll with the flow? How do we sort this out? We were actually, I think, kind of clever because the character would constantly wear a hat, and we were able to grab from the theater's prop department the only wig that we could get our hands on, which was a bald wig. So it just had a strip of hair around the back. So for the rest of shooting, whenever this guy was on camera, he was wearing that wig turned so that the hair was facing towards the camera and the cap was on top of it. And I've got to say, unless you're looking for it, you wouldn't know.
I was doing a play. It was just 3 actors, and the 3rd actor decided to go skiing.
Oh, no.
He came back from a weekend in a cast with crutches, and we had to rework the entire thing around that. I really liked the cast. I thought the cast was extremely interesting because it's a group of actors who are all gifted actors. Well, not all. I mean, Jim Guy wasn't a gifted actor. He was funny, though. But, Steve Buscemi, Catherine Keener, Dermot Mulroney, who I'm a huge fan of because I feel like I've been watching him my entire life. They're all great actors. And so to see them having moments where they were being good actors and then having moments where they were just ridiculous was fantastic. I did love the performances. And some of the lines were actually really good. And that was one of the things that kind of stood out to me. And we have the stage manager, not the stage manager, but she's in charge of everything.
Oh, yes. Wanda, played by Danielle von Zerneck.
Wanda is hysterical. She's managing everything. She's making sure everything's ready. At some point, the focus puller, which some people may not know that there's somebody who's actually doing the focusing, messes up. He apologizes and she goes, "Thank you for your apology, but you'll never work in this town again." And it's just set as a sideline and nobody bats an eye at it.
Yeah.
But she gets mad at the entire world.
Oh, yes.
So that's fine.
Yeah.
But also, again, these weird moments like the mother-daughter scene.
Yes.
Weirdly intense acting, very good. And then, of course, they keep having to cut because something goes wrong or then somebody forgets a line and they have to start over.
My favorite part out of this part, which is that they say, all right, we're just going to do a rehearsal, just a line run through, just so that everyone remembers what's going on. And the camera operator disappears to go be sick in the bathroom because there is some expired milk that he's drunk, which is a subplot, but whatever. And then they go through and do this emotional performance. And Steve Buscemi's like, roll the camera. And the focus pull leans in and says, well, we've got to wait for Wolf. The look on his face that is both enthralled by the performance that he's seeing and gutted because the camera is not rolling is wonderful.
Dermot Mulroney plays the character of Wolf, who is the cinematographer. He is an absolute ridiculous stereotype. He's wearing a beret, just to give you an idea. And he is so freaking ridiculous. But then in the middle of the film, he gets broken up with.
Yes.
And then I just wrote Sad Wolf. Then I wrote Wolf Tears a little later because they just have him cry.
They have him crying. And then I think it's the mother character,
Ruth,
reaches up, lifts the eye patch that he's wearing, and then the tears fall down from that side too.
At that moment, I was also like, what am I watching? What is this? What is this? But it was very good in that way. It's just interesting. But I have to ask about the damn structure of this movie.
Okay.
Let me explain.
Yes.
You watch the first 24 minutes, because I looked, and then you go, wait, was that part just a dream? And then you go through another segment, and then we have another person seemingly waking up, and you're like, wait, was that part a dream? And then out of just pure fun, the next thing that they're doing is filming a dream sequence. What in the world, Steve?
I'm not sure I can explain the why, but you are absolutely correct. Parts number 1 and 2 are dreams. The first one being a dream of Steve Buscemi's character, the director, an anxiety dream because he's stressed about filming. The second part being a dream of Catherine Keener's character. The director, Tom DiCillo, wanted there to actually be a little bit of unrequited romance between the two characters. Because you remember that in part 1, Nick kind of professes his love for Nicole. In part 2, they kind of get together towards the end. And then in part 3, they don't address it at all. But having written 2 dream sequences, he then thought it would be fun to have the third part be them filming a dream sequence. So there is kind of that theme running throughout.
It's amusing. It was both confusing and amusing. Again, just a very weird film, interesting. There were some lines that I loved. Chad Palomino, who is supposed to be their A-lister, right? But he's clearly sort of A-lister, but not A-lister.
Right.
And at some point, he's talking about the films that he's been in. And the quote is, oh yeah, I played a rapist Michelle Pfeiffer falls in love with. And I played a sexy serial killer that shacks up with Winona Ryder. I was like, there's very specific people being called out in this film, in the script. The fact that later he goes, I only did this because I thought you were friends with Tarantino.
Right.
It's 1995, so we are in prime zone for Tarantino. And I'll have to say, quite possibly, the best insult in the entire film.
Oh, which one?
You hostess Twinkie motherfucker. Yes. Which, of course, Steve Buscemi delivers perfectly.
Of course.
That was something that, for me, was a real highlight, which was Steve Buscemi. There's so much of him in this film, and it's got that combination between funny moments, intense moments, caring moments, and it was such a great vehicle for him. I just loved watching him because he's such a good actor. What about you? How did you feel rewatching it? Because I know that young you was like, yeah, but what about you of now? What about mature you?
Oh, I still enjoyed the heck out of it. I actually did not have a problem with the dream sequence structure throughout. I thought that kind of added to the silliness of the whole endeavor, if you will. But I still loved it. The writing is sharp, as you say. Part number 2, really enjoyed because the chaos that comes in part 2 is largely due to Chad, because he's not a particularly good actor and he's got suggestions. So he changes what he's doing every single take, which messes everything else up. I was laughing hysterically at the take where he decided, oh, I should lie on the bed, because we see what the camera is seeing when they actually shoot the scenes. And for that one, all you see is his hair and forehead coming out of Catherine Keener's shoulder. Catherine Keener is turned all the way around, so you're just getting the back of her head. And anyone who watches this has to be thinking, that is such a terrible shot. What on earth were they thinking? It was delightful.
I will point out that even though Steve is referring to this as part 1, part 2, part 3, you do not see that watching the film. You just go from one section to the other. There's nothing that indicates that we're in another section or in a new section. Again, just the two people waking up from their dreams.
A door closes and someone wakes up. That is the only indication you have that there is a cut, something has happened. You're right. Can we talk about Peter Dinklage?
Always. I always have time for Peter Dinklage.
Because he has a delightful monologue, which is not particularly long, but it makes a very good point.
It's one of the best pieces of dialogue, I think, in the film.
Because he is playing a little person in a dream sequence, and all he has to do is walk around Catherine Keener's character holding an apple, stop and laugh. And he calls the director out on it, saying, why is my character a dwarf? Why does he have to be a dwarf? This is the only way you people know to signify that, oh, something's weird. Oh, look, it's a dwarf. Must be a fucking dream sequence. Wah! And then he wanders off saying, you can take this dream sequence and shove it up your ass, which is marvelous.
If you don't watch this film, please go to YouTube and find his monologue, because it's so well written and so wonderfully delivered.
The other thing I love about his acting is there are 2 times we see a bunch of the other characters, the crew around the smoke machine, and they're discussing how to get it to work, what fluid goes in what hole. And you just see Peter Dinklage's character walk in the background, stop in a gap created by the guys. He shakes his head and then continues walking. It's phenomenal.
Every scene he's in is fantastic.
It's great.
I'm very biased, so love the man. Would watch him in anything.
What did you think overall? Because this is one of those movies that I liked it then, I still like it now. And there is part of me that really wants you to like it, but there is part of me that totally admits that, no, this is kind of weird in the grand scheme of things. What'd you think?
I was in high school and college in the mid-90s, and this feels like such a pure mid-90s film. It makes me think of Kevin Smith.
Max out the credit cards to make the movie and hope that it works.
You can even go to like Mariachi. That was also an independent film. These films that came out in that time period, it has that vibe for me. There was a level of nostalgia that I was surprised that I was feeling. The film itself is very much an independent film. Mm-hmm. The structure of it is odd. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not against the dream sequences. Don't get me wrong. That isn't it. I was just saying that during the watching, I'm just like, wait, what? And then I think, okay, I get it now. That was a dream. And then, wait, what? Am I in Inception? Is any of this real?
And that you found yourself asking during the third part, it's like, okay, is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
I really did like it, but I can also 100% understand that a lot of people probably really didn't like it. Because not only do you have a weird structure, your subject matter is very specific, and it's just kind of odd. For me, good odd.
Yes.
For you, good odd. But you can't convince me that a general audience was like, yay, this is what we wanted.
So getting to your question of how did this movie do? Kind of difficult to say. I'm going to give you numbers, but then I'm going to give you some explanation of the numbers, if you will. Much like his first film, critics loved this. They thought it was very enjoyable, a sharp satire of what goes on behind the scenes on movie sets. They liked it. It actually won him the Walt Salt Screenwriting Award at the Sundance Film Festival and received, I think, like 7 other nominations at various independent film festivals across the globe. In terms of money, it cost about $500,000 to make and grossed $1.1 million. But that $1.1 million was generated by 32 theaters over the span of about 6 weeks. So not a wide release. It was very narrow release. And because of that, I think that actually means it did really well.
That sounds like a success when you tell me that they made their money back and then some with just 32. That's a success. for a little independent film.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
And I want to share with you one of the quotes that Tom DiCillo said of making this movie, because I think it captured the vibe of everything quite well. This was one of the most efficient and creatively charged sets I have ever been on. There were no agents. There were no producers. It was just us.
It does feel like a group of friends making a movie. In that way, I find it charming.
That's a good word for it, charming.
It's a charming little independent film.
Would you recommend that people see this? I would. I realize I do this every time I recommend a movie. It's like, if you think you'd enjoy it, you're probably right. Go and watch it.
If you're, okay, so...
What sort of caveats do we want to put on this?
1, if you like independent films, because some people don't.
That's true.
2, if you love these actors.
I'd say if you are a Steve Buscemi or Peter Dinklage fan, do watch this.
But really more Steve Buscemi, because Peter Dinklage is only in a small portion of it. If you like movies about movies, then this is also good for you.
I would even say that if you are interested in how movies are made, perhaps see this, because one of the things I found enlightening the first time I watched it years and years ago in high school was the behind-the-scenes look at everyone who is involved in actually, making a proper movie, if you will. Because our experience, my friends and I, we made these little movies, but it was, one person with a camcorder. So to see we've got 3 people running the camera, the dolly, the assistant director, the light, the boom guy. Educational, I think you could say.
Yeah, I think it is, in a goofy sort of way. So there you go, folks. If that's your cup of tea, if you can check off all those boxes, then yes, please go watch this movie, Living in Oblivion.
Yes.
And if that sounds awful, then I suggest you skip this one, as some people I know will.
So, for a little independent film, I think that went all right. It is my turn to pass the baton back to you. And I do believe that this is going to be your final pick for the year of 2024.
That's right. We're right at the end. So, for my final pick of the year, we are going to go to 2005. We are going to join Robert Downey Jr. and Val Kilmer in a little film called Kiss Kiss, Bang Bang. Thank you so much for listening or watching and joining us on our little independent film adventure. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and join us next time when we watch the film Kiss Kiss, Bang Bang.
Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?